I'm Molly Jane from Blockworks. I thought you guys could all just go through and introduce yourselves briefly, and then we'll get right into the final questions.
Sure. Yeah, Scott Minneman. I'm the CISO and head of risk at Zero Hash.
Hey, I'm Katelyn. I'm the CISO for crypto at Robinhood.
Hi, I'm Norah Beers. I'm the CISO at Grayscale.
And last but not least, Edward Newman. I'm the CISO at Digital Asset.
All right, so my first question is directed towards Norah, but then afterwards feel free to take it and apply it to your own companies or areas of expertise. So I'm just curious what you think are the biggest cybersecurity challenges unique to asset management firms and how you ensure that Grayscale, bless you, remains resilient against these challenges.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to information security in asset management, really you're talking about enabling the business to be able to deliver innovative products to their investors, to do so in a reliable, efficient, secure way, right? And so that means that you've got to be able to partner with the business, you've got to be able to ensure that your operations are resilient. You also have to be able to extend and ensure that your risk tolerance is met even out at your third parties, which I think is one of the most difficult things that we're all facing, and maybe is even more difficult in the crypto space because beyond just traditional third parties that you've got to be able to control, you also have to think about how do you custody these assets. And I think if you can find a way to really reach out that way and also be able to partner with the business upstream, then you can really get ahead of some of those risks and be more forward-facing with the business in a way that allows them to innovate faster and also themselves partner better with security in a way that I think, 20 years ago, the relationship could be much more adversarial. And I think we're seeing a lot more partnership when folks are sort of having that side of a relationship upstream.
We can move on to the next question then. That's totally fine. So this is going to be for Katelyn because, Norah, you brought up crypto custody, and it's important to think about the differences between crypto custody and then traditional finance. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what are some of the safeguards that are essential to protect crypto assets when you're talking about custody.
Great question. I think when it comes to custody and custody infrastructure, it's very different than, traditional banking infrastructure. It's much more technical, engineering focused. You need a very specific skill set. You're often talking about different elements of security across key management, access control, but also operational security and then physical security for all of these sites. And I think it's lost on a lot of people how much effort needs to go into that, even from your key personnel risk and your outward-facing exposure of those people. What do they post on LinkedIn? Where are your sites going to be? Can you get to them in enough time? I think I spent a lot of time with our COO really talking about, hey, from a security standpoint, I can put all these things in place, but I don't think you're going to be able to move funds really quickly. So I actually don't think any of this works. So I think you have to balance your custody infrastructure and your custody operations with the needs of the business, kind of similar to what Norah was talking about. It's a lot of enabling them, but also trying to make it as secure as possible. And with the technical challenges that come with it, how hard it is to build and implement, I think that's amplified a little bit more. The execution rigor that goes into this, if you're doing it appropriately, really requires months and months and months of time and actually really needs a dedicated team 24/7 to be able to do that. And I think that gets underestimated a lot across a lot of different companies.
Can I add something to that? I was struck when I started looking into the custody architecture at some of the different providers at how different they all are. There's no best practice. There's no real one standard that everyone's building a custody solution to. You hear the way that Katelyn's talking about it. She had to come up with a lot of solutions that are achieving the same goals that we're trying to achieve with traditional custody, but you have to be somewhat creative in the different ways that you can get from point A to point B. And if you look at the different providers, they're all doing it totally differently, which makes, when you're trying to assess the quality of that custodial solution, somewhat difficult to do.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. Even when you're assessing a provider, again, with your third parties, like the rigor in which you should assess some of these is not going to match your typical like third-party vendor questionnaire, right? A lot of times you probably need to do an on-site visit. You probably need to do extensive background checks. Like there's a whole nother, it's really a whole nother world than traditional assets. And it's a make or break thing for really the entirety of your business, because I think that's kind of where it all comes to, that's where it all comes together. So yeah, the architecture is it's hard. Every time, I've built custody so many times, and every time I don't like something about it and I want to change something about it, and I'm like never happy with it. So yeah.
Do you think that over time people are taking crypto custody more seriously as they should, as crypto becomes quote unquote like more mainstream, like everyone says? Or do you think that traditional, asset managers or traditional financial institutions are still like much more behind than the crypto native solutions?
I'm going to say no. I would say it's probably worse than when I started. I've been in the space since about 2015, specifically in custody, and I don't think it's gotten that much better. If anything, it's more of like, how do we do this faster with less and less security over time? People don't want to do like the purest model that this typically requires.
It's kind of a bummer, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, moving on to something a little bit different. This is for Scott. So Scott, you have a different, like a slightly longer title than some of the other people here we were just talking about. So I wanted to ask like how you personally approach enterprise risk management from sort of more of like a holistic 360-degree perspective with that idea of risk and compliance tied in.
Yeah. Like I said a little bit ago, I'm CISO and head of risk, and I think that this is kind of the natural evolution of what us as CISOs and really all of us as security leaders are going to end up being over time, whether it's formally in your title or not. I mean, we've heard already from both Katelyn and Norah about the importance of partnering with the rest of the business and understanding the rest of the flows and like the way that the other departments and the other groups in the organization interact with the assets or the transactions or whatever it is that's going through the system. You as security can't really truly secure that and understand the way that that needs to be protected if you don't know what that team does, who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, and really partner with them. And so you have to make that an intentional effort. Go out of your way, have those conversations, create those conversations, make those appointments, make those people understand that you're on their side at the end of the day. I find that very, very, very few business leaders truly don't care about security or don't care about risk. They may not know how to do it. They may not know how to care about it. But if you come to them with not as the person of, no, we're not going to do this thing, but as the person of, here's the way that we can do this thing in the right way, or we can do this thing in a way that protects you and protects the company, they will do that. They will see you as a partner, but you have a responsibility to create that partnership with the rest of the organization. They're not going to do it for you.
Got it. So this can be a question for all of you, just talking about that collaboration. How do you think people in your role can better collaborate with other business units, even beyond risk, to make sure that there's that like proactive, like forward movement for information security in your organizations? Maybe Edward, yeah?
Yeah, I could take a go. It's education. A lot of the time, we're trying to explain to them in business terms about why they need to care about a particular problem. I've been CISO for 9 years, but I learned at the beginning that if you go to them with a highly complex problem, with a highly complex solution, their eyes will glaze over, they won't care. So a lot of what we spent time is actually trying to explain to the other business units, particularly engineering, about why it's important to think about security, how to build those features into your product very early on, how to help document that so you can explain to your customers. So I'll make it very clear, we're a technology provider primarily. We are in the business of putting out Cantel Network, but we have been providing tech. And so a lot of the conversations I've had as CISO with the other business units is, so with sales and with marketing and with engineering, is how do you get them to understand and communicate the importance of these particular aspects and making sure that they can talk to that as part of the product.
Edward, do you find that is it somewhat a function of timing? If you can get in front of them earlier in their design build phase, does that conversation go differently than if it came to you later?
Cynically, I would say that security is always the last, as we are seeing right now. But as always, you want to have the conversation about secure by design, getting it into early in the whole cycle, getting them to think about it. It is always the same mantra that if you're trying to fix things at the end of the process, it's 100 times harder than at the beginning. So that whole conversation has been in there, and I'm lucky. I have a lot of very thoughtful individuals, cryptographers and so forth, who think about this as part of their day job. But it is always still a conversation about make sure you think about this early on. As we've gone into the services business and running a network, it is then getting them to understand, no, you can't just create new addresses on the ledger and assume that the finance team is going to be happy about that. Think about these are the things you're going to need to do before you start rolling this out into production.
Well, and I think if you can achieve what Scott's described and sort of convince the business that your goal is to find a way to say yes to what they want to do, then they're more likely to pull you in early on versus you having to sort of elbow your way in, or convince them later on that you'll be useful or at least you won't be a detractor, right? Yeah.
I agree with all of that. I will say if you are having challenges like getting pulled in early, which I'm sure we've all experienced, in some way, shape, or form, and when you join a new place, like you will be the last to know initially. I have found there's always value in kind of not necessarily finding things that are wrong, but finding things that are like super critical, highly exploitable, bringing those back to the business for more of a discussion of like, hey, I think I was able to do all these things. What do you guys think about that? Do you feel the same? Am I missing something? And kind of opening up for like, I really care about what you guys are doing. I'm trying to help you. I've noticed all of these things. I just want to make sure I'm right. And then they're more receptive to like, oh, wow, like, yes, we can do that better, and I would love to fix that, and maybe we can do this. Are you able to help do that? And so that's also been like a helpful way in for me, is kind of being able to show the value that you can add and how much better you can make something. And then usually there's like a little light bulb that'll go off of like, oh my gosh, we didn't notice this. And it's like, well, of course you didn't, because you weren't looking at it and you probably had to ship this really fast. So let me look at it, and then maybe this won't happen again. So like that's also been an approach if you're not able to convince them to come to you initially.
All right, so I have another question for Edward that's sort of changing the subject a little bit to bring up interoperability and what role you think that plays in creating, a secure digital asset ecosystem, and how are you able to deal with the risks associated with interoperability?
I think interoperability is around, and Digital Asset has particular views on this, which is we believe that the market's going to need to build in interoperable systems, the ability to compose systems. So, the person who builds the payment rails and the person who builds the bond rails and the person who builds the equity rails, the ability for those to then interoperate and to build composed applications that add complexity, add value, is essential to the whole ecosystem. And interoperability is all the way up the stack. So my mental model is the infrastructure, the ledgers themselves, the smart contracts, and then finally the business processes. Interoperability is at each and every single one of those levels. How do you make sure that the tokens that you've got there are actually in a format that allows you to build systems that allow you to swap those particular tokens together? So interoperability is going to become a vital part of this.
I think that's really important, in particular as we're trying to give access to folks that maybe otherwise couldn't get in and get exposure to these sorts of assets. As these new assets start coming online that are on maybe different different technologies, our ability to be able to provide access to those in a way that folks can actually maybe in their brokerage accounts, maybe on Robinhood, be able to get exposure to those things that otherwise they were going to have to, frankly, be somewhat technical to self-custody themselves. If you can create interoperability, it'll allow those providers to be able to offer those things at scale in a way that reaches more people and draws more folks into this asset class that are maybe standing on the sidelines right now or not excited about some of these older things and want to be, want to get in on the next cool token.
Yeah, interoperability is going to raise a number of interesting issues. If you look at the security of blockchain, things like bridges are one of the more dangerous aspects of this. So does interoperability mean that you're building lots and lots of bridges? Well, you're going to build lots of potentially weak points in the ecosystem that are going to be exploitable and so forth. So making sure that you're building systems that can communicate together but are designed and structured and coded in a secure way is vitally important.
I think too that plays on like your custody infrastructure and it being able to support that, right? Like you don't want something that just supports kind of a simplistic version of what you're trying to do. You want to build for like 5-10 years out of what you think you may need, as well as having, policies and access controls and things like that in place to, if you are doing a lot of bridging right now, you're able to properly like allow list and put different mechanisms in place to stop bad things from happening and stop money from going out the door unnecessarily. So I think like in building that, being able to, you want your custody platforms and your systems to be able to support that and to be configured appropriately for it.
Yeah, sorry, Scott. I was just going to say, I don't think our customers are going to thank us by building systems that are silos. Lots and lots of 1,000 more silos is not going to be the long-term strategy. So how do you build those interconnected systems is vital. Sorry, Scott.
No, that's okay. One of the things that I think is interesting when you think about problems like that is it gets very exciting in a hurry when you think about that. Like, here are all the things that are possible, here are all the great things that we can do, and everyone thinks about all of the use cases that they want to have. Here's we want this path to succeed, we want this path to succeed. But what I think is interesting and what I think a lot of groups that are in this position tend to shortcut or overlook a little bit is specifically define out the things that you want not to succeed. Start to define the failure cases that you want to make sure that, okay, we want someone to be able to do this and this, but they can't do any of this. And we have to intentionally think about the things that they can't be allowed to do so that we make sure that it's built, coded, set up in a secure way from the beginning, and we don't have to learn these things later the hard way.
So Katelyn, you just mentioned something interesting, which is that when you're building these systems, you're trying to think 5 or 10 years in advance. And I wonder if anyone here could talk about the issues with thinking that far in advance when technology is changing so quickly and regulatory environments are changing so quickly. Like, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid? What are some of the ways you can get around those when you're building like for a future?
Yeah, I think like particular to like custody, right? Like you think of something where you're like, oh, maybe right now we only have 10 assets. Is there ever going to be a day where the business is like, I need to list 100 new assets in the next month? Are you actually able to achieve that with the setup that you have, or is it going to take you 6 months to do it? Depending on what you've set up and how you've configured it and your signing mechanisms and MPC versus multi-sig and all of that. So I think like when you're building and you're designing all of this, those business needs have to go into your decision. And that's kind of the balance between sort of like the more purist model and then actually making things that support the business that you have. Because the goal is to make money. If you're not making money, why would we be here? So I think a lot of those decisions are actually important, and then actually having enough security layered in and baked in, whether it's through the policies that you configure, the roles and responsibilities that you've designated, all of that, even to be able to support signing operations for something. Like you'd want to know all of these business problems. Like you want to talk to your operations teams about like how much money do you have to move in a day? How quickly are you going to have to do that? What are our SLAs? Because if you've built something that's so safe and so secure, but nobody can use it, then what is the point? Like you haven't enabled anything, but what you've built might be perfect, but if no one can use it, what are you going to do?
All right, another question that sort of touches on these future technologies that I had mentioned, which is how do you think you can leverage technologies like AI and machine learning when you're trying to enhance like threat detection and other parts of your job?
I can go. I think like a big challenge that actually talked about earlier this morning is, and actually it's ties in great to what Scott was talking about. You really do need to understand your entire environment and kind of document where you have all these vulnerabilities or where you have potential issues. It's really hard to do that like manually, right? Like you may have a team of engineers or architects who, I know, even I've had this happen like multiple times. Like I may know the custody platform really well, but I don't necessarily understand, different systems that interact with it. And that may lead to not understanding a vulnerability in system A that then would potentially affect custody, but someone else knew that. So how do I take all this information that's in everybody's heads and be able to put that somewhere and then analyze our security posture on an ongoing basis? I think something like AI would be really great to consistently assess your current control environment and your security posture across a number of different systems and or business lines. Because that's something that's just like really hard to do. Like you have to go talk to someone or you have to look somewhere else and you might not know where to look, and everything is kind of spread out or it's in someone's head and then that person leaves and then you forgot about this happened last year and it still exists and we did not fix it. So I think that's one area that could be really helpful is understanding your entire threat landscape on an ongoing basis, especially for compliance efforts too. You may think your controls are all working, but you have gaps maybe in different areas that you might have not seen.
I think that's right. I think that's a really good application there, this mapping piece of it, because you can then take that even to, kind of a different context where you're going to a product team or, a project team or someone that wants to come in and change something or build something new, and you can come in equipped with, here's exactly what it's going to change in the existing flow. Here are the systems that it touches. If you change this, you're going to divert the whole thing. Like, you can't do this.
And you can be more confident about your answers, right? You can do it at scale for a lot cheaper. And then you can use your very limited security resources because, this community is still very small, far below the amount of demand that we have for skilled professionals, right? And so you can use those better and be more confident in the answers that you've got if you've, sort of used AI up front to help you map all that.
Yeah, just to play the contrarian for a second, the thing that intrigues me is, I don't know if this model works, but when we used to algorithmic trading in the big financial houses that I used to work for, it was fine until such time as the algorithm went wrong. And then you had to build circuit breakers. You had to limit the rights that it was able to do. You had put trading limits on the algorithmic trading. So it does intrigue me as to how soon is AI going to have to think about the same sorts of things? With agenic AI, if I get the term right, what rights does that agent have to go and do in your environment? What trading limits has it been given? And so I do believe at some point there's going to be a need to go back and look at how do you make sure that this intelligence in your agent that you don't have as much direct understanding about how it came to a decision is allowed to do certain things. So to me, that's definitely an area that still is not really being discussed in the AI space.
So I think we have time for about one more question. And I wanted to ask you guys, in America, there's definitely going to be a much different regulatory attitude towards cryptocurrency for the next few years. And I'm wondering if you think that could either benefit or potentially hinder in some way your work as CSOs in your roles.
I think it expands the realm of what's possible in ways that could be good or could be bad. I mean, I think that I was having this discussion with one of our groups the other day. The uncertainty of what tomorrow or next week or next month is going to look like is greater than it's been in a long time in this space, and that can be a good thing. It can be amazing. The ceiling is really high, but also the floor could be really low. Somebody could take that and use it for really bad things or use it to do really bad things to our companies or to the industry as a whole. And so making sure that we as CISOs, as risk leaders, just as business leaders, within our companies, are able to see the changes in real time or as quickly as we can, so that we can make sure that we are prepared and responding appropriately, to make sure that things are going in the correct upward direction and not the downward one.
Generally, I think I haven't thought much about it, probably because I think it's erring on the side of potentially alarming. I think, 2022 was not that long ago. 2021 was not that long ago. And I think those were all direct results of, probably lack of regulation and enforcement. And we kind of saw what happened, especially in the crypto industry. I think everyone's in favor. Do I think regulation by enforcement is an answer by any means? No. But do I think that the flip side of that is a good thing? Not really either. I think having seen what's already happened, I don't know that we've necessarily made that big of improvements to really be confident that those sort of things will happen again. I don't know. I think just living through any sort of financial crisis is not fun. So it wasn't that long ago. So I think I'm not that excited.
I suppose I view this as a pendulum. Quite a lot of regulation is there because something went wrong. So if you look back at 2008, Lehman Brothers exploding, a lot of regulations came out around, how do we protect the market from these sorts of situations? And so there is a protective nature of some regulations. I'm not going to say all. And so, I view this as it's a good thing for us as a collective group within this room that the regulations will make our technology easier to go and deploy. It's going to be the next big blow up that's going to then probably change the pendulum again, and there will be some more regulations put around. So, too many people doing rug pulls on customers is going to probably force the regulators to do something about it. So the change in the regulatory environment is good, and we want to see that happen. But it's also going to need to be done in a carefully thought through way.
So just like sort of a joking question, but none of you guys have any plans to help custody the US's Bitcoin strategic reserve? I don't know. I guess we'll end on that note. Thank you all so much for coming for this final panel.